The snow had been falling steadily for hours, blanketing the small town of Coldridge in silence. The streetlights cast a warm, hazy glow over empty sidewalks, and the faint hum of the heater inside the sheriff's office was the only sound Deputy Hank Rourke could hear as he stepped outside. It was nearly 10 p.m., and the night shift had been uneventful, until he saw the boy standing alone near the front steps. Still, silent, holding something close to his chest. The boy looked no older than 10. Thin, pale, and dressed in a hoodie too light for this kind of cold. His sneakers were soaked through, and snow clung to his sleeves like frost on forgotten leaves. In his arms, wrapped in an old flannel blanket, was a small German shepherd pup, no more than a few weeks old. The way he clutched it, tight but gentle, told Hank this wasn't just a pet. It was something more. Hank approached slowly, the snow crunching beneath his boots. "You all right, kid?" he asked, his voice low and even. The boy looked up, eyes red-rimmed not from the cold, but from crying. He didn't answer at first. He just stared, like he was weighing whether or not Hank was someone he could trust. "My name's Noah Dempsey," the boy said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is Bo. I need you to take him." Hank blinked, caught off guard. "Take him? Why?" Noah looked down at the puppy, who whimpered softly in his arms. His lower lip trembled, but he kept his grip steady. He stepped forward and gently held Bo out to Hank. The deputy took the pup carefully, instinctively cradling it like he'd once held his own son, years ago, before the silence took over his home. "My dad said there's no room for useless things in our house," Noah said, his voice breaking. "I think he meant both of us." The weight of those words hit Hank harder than he expected. Bo nestled against his chest, warm and trembling. For a moment, Hank couldn't find anything to say. He just stood there in the snow, holding a pup that didn't belong to him, staring at a boy who looked like he hadn't been held in a long, long time. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted quietly, but unmistakably. Deputy Hank Rourke watched the boy's face as he held the trembling puppy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cold pressed against them from all sides, but it was the silence, the kind that holds too much pain, that chilled Hank the most. He opened the door to the station and gestured for Noah to come inside. "You can't stay out here, kid. Come in. Just for tonight." Inside, the warmth of the sheriff's office made Noah flinch, as if his body had already accepted the cold as punishment. Hank took his coat off and wrapped it around the boy's small shoulders. He motioned for Noah to sit on the old leather bench near the wall while he fetched a towel to dry off Bo. The pup nuzzled into Hank's arm, too tired to resist, and already trusting someone new. Hank had seen a lot in his years: domestic disputes, lost kids, broken men. But there was something about Noah that sat heavy in his chest. It wasn't just the boy's situation. It was the way he didn't cry. The way he seemed to have done all his crying long before arriving at Hank's doorstep. Hank knelt in front of him. "You hungry?" Noah nodded. "A little." Hank heated up a leftover sandwich from the staff fridge and poured a glass of apple juice. Noah took the food carefully, like he didn't want to seem greedy. He fed small pieces of bread to Bo, who licked them from his fingers. Hank watched quietly, remembering how his own son used to do the same thing with their golden retriever, Max, before the accident. That memory, still sharp after all these years, cut through him like thin ice cracking underfoot. "I'll call someone in the morning," Hank said after a moment, more to himself than to Noah. "A social worker. We'll figure out what's going on." Noah looked up slowly. "Can Bo stay with me tonight?" The question wasn't defiant, it was scared, honest. Hank hesitated for a second before nodding. "Yeah, just for tonight." He walked over to the supply room and returned with a folded blanket and an old pillow. Noah curled up on the bench with Bo tucked safely against his chest, eyes finally starting to close. Hank turned off the main light and sat at his desk, watching over them. He told himself it was just for tonight, but deep down, something told him it wouldn't be that simple. The next morning came slowly, as light crept in through the frosted windows of the sheriff's office. Deputy Hank Rourke hadn't slept much. He'd spent most of the night sitting at his desk, stealing glances at Noah Dempsey curled up on the bench, Bo snuggled under his chin. It wasn't just the boy's presence that kept Hank awake. It was the nagging sense that something wasn't right, something about how calm the boy was, how used he seemed to being ignored, left behind. At 7:15 a.m., Hank made a pot of coffee and some instant oatmeal, setting a bowl in front of Noah when he stirred awake. The boy sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, careful not to disturb Bo. "Thanks," he mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. He ate quietly while Bo chewed on an old tennis ball Hank had found in the storage room. Hank took a seat across from them, elbows on the table, eyes searching. "Noah," Hank said gently, "where exactly is home?" The boy didn't answer at first. He stared down at his oatmeal, as if the bowl might offer a safer answer than the truth. Finally, he said, "East of the tracks, near the grain silos. My dad and I stay in the trailer behind the old feed store." His voice was thin and cautious. Hank could hear the fear between the words. That part of town wasn't unfamiliar to Hank. He'd responded to more than a few calls over there: domestic disturbances, noise complaints, drugs. The old feed store had been closed for over a decade, and most of the trailers out back weren't in livable condition. Hank wrote it down quietly in his notepad, but his hand lingered on the paper longer than necessary. "You got any other family?" Hank asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Noah shook his head. "Just my dad, but he don't really talk much." There was a pause. "Unless he's drinking." That one sentence said more than any police report ever could. Hank felt his stomach tighten. He'd seen too many kids stuck in that kind of silence, left to fend for themselves in the middle of someone else's storm. He stood and walked to the back room, picking up the phone to call social services. His hand hovered over the receiver for a moment. He knew what he should do, but something made him pause. Deputy Hank Rourke didn't make the call to social services, at least not yet. Something in Noah's eyes that morning had stopped him. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, like the boy had already lived through the worst parts and expected no one to care. Hank knew the protocol, but this didn't feel like a case number. It felt personal, and for the first time in years, he let that matter. He left Noah and Bo at the station with Janice, the office clerk who just arrived for her morning shift. "Just keep him company for a bit," he said quietly. Janice, a mother of 4 grown kids, gave him a knowing look and nodded. Hank grabbed his keys and drove toward the grain silos Noah had mentioned, a part of town most people avoided unless they had no other choice. The wind picked up as he pulled into the gravel lot behind the abandoned feed store. Rusted barrels, broken fencing, and piles of snow-covered scrap metal painted a clear picture of neglect. He spotted the trailer Noah had described, small, dented, with one shutter hanging loose and a window covered by a black trash bag. Hank stepped out of the cruiser slowly, his boots crunching on the icy ground. He knocked on the metal door twice. No answer. A third knock, louder. Then the sound of movement inside. The door creaked open, revealing a man with sunken eyes, unshaven face, and a whiskey bottle on the counter behind him. "What the hell do you want?" the man snapped. "Walt Dempsey," Hank asked, already knowing the answer. "What's it to you?" "I'm with the sheriff's department," Hank said calmly. "I've got your son at the station. He showed up last night with a puppy. Said you told him to leave." He kept his voice neutral, though every instinct in him was ready to push through that door. Walt's expression hardened. "He ran off, like always. Thinks he's better than me. Thinks he can do whatever he wants just 'cause he's got a dog now." Hank didn't respond right away. He took in the mess. The overturned chair, the broken heater, the stench of stale alcohol. This wasn't just a broken home. It was a place where love had been buried long ago. Hank knew what he had to do now. He turned to leave, but not before saying, "I'll be back, Mr. Dempsey, with paperwork." Walt laughed bitterly behind him, but Hank didn't look back, because something inside him had just shifted from concern to responsibility. Back at the station, Noah sat in the corner of the break room with Bo curled up in his lap, half asleep. He didn't ask where Deputy Hank Rourke had gone, but the boy's eyes followed the clock on the wall, minute after minute, as if afraid time might run out before someone came back for him. When Hank finally returned, covered in snow and with a clenched jaw, Noah didn't ask questions. But he knew. Hank had gone to see his father. Hank sat down across from him, removed his gloves, and sighed deeply. "You don't have to go back there," he said simply. "Not now. Not today." He expected resistance, confusion, maybe even fear. But instead, Noah looked down at Bo and whispered, "Okay." One word, quiet but powerful. Hank realized then how much the boy had already accepted about his life, and how much he'd given up on. Later that day, Hank made some calls. Quiet ones. Not to the overworked agency that would file Noah under temporary placement, but to someone he trusted, Helen, his older sister in Springfield, who ran a private foster resource network. She owed him a favor, or maybe he just knew she had a bigger heart than most. By late afternoon, she agreed to visit Coldridge the next day to meet Noah herself. As the sun began to set, the town dipped into its usual hush. Snow fell again, soft and slow. Hank brought Noah and Bo to the small guest room in the back of the station, a room used by stranded travelers or the occasional overnight hold when the cells were full. It wasn't much, but it had a cot, a blanket, and a lamp with a warm yellow glow. "You'll stay here tonight," Hank said. "Tomorrow we figure out what's next." Noah didn't speak, but as he lay down, Bo climbed beside him and rested his head on the boy's chest. Hank watched the two of them for a long moment before closing the door halfway. Something tugged at him, a voice he hadn't heard in years, the father he once was, the man he buried after his own son died. That version of himself felt dangerously close to the surface again. For the first time in a long time, Hank didn't push it back down. The next morning brought clear skies and biting wind. Hank Rourke stood outside the station, his coffee already cold in his hand, watching the road for signs of Helen's car. Inside, Noah was helping Janice fill Bo's food bowl, moving slowly but deliberately, as if every small task helped ground him. Bo followed him everywhere, never more than a few feet away. They were a pair now, wounded, quiet, but fiercely connected. At 9:43 a.m., a silver sedan pulled into the lot. Hank straightened his back. Helen Rourke, in her early 50s, stepped out with a heavy coat, a clipboard under her arm, and eyes that had seen just as much of the world as her brothers, but responded to it differently. Where Hank had grown colder over the years, Helen had only grown more determined to fight for the people no one else noticed. They hugged briefly. Not the kind of hug that needs words, but the kind that says, "I know." She glanced toward the station window. "That's him." Hank nodded. "Name's Noah Dempsey. Quiet, sharp. He's been through more than he lets on." Helen looked at her brother. "Like someone else I know." Inside, Noah stood when they entered. He didn't smile, but his eyes stayed on Helen longer than they had with anyone new. Bo sat by his side, tail tapping once against the floor. Helen crouched down, not to talk to the dog, but to Noah. "Hey," she said gently. "I'm Helen. Your friend Hank here says you've had a pretty rough week." Noah glanced at Hank, unsure. "Are you a social worker?" "No," she replied, still kneeling. "I help kids find places where they're safe, where they're wanted." She said it slowly, honestly, with no sugarcoating. Noah didn't flinch, but Bo pressed closer against his leg. Helen noticed, but didn't push. She stood and smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything now. I'm just here to meet you." Later that afternoon, while Noah napped with Bo on the cot, Helen and Hank sat in the office, going over forms and options. There were legal paths, temporary placements, court approvals, all things Hank knew could take weeks, maybe months. But what Helen said next caught him off guard. "There's another option," she said quietly, tapping the form in front of him. "You." Deputy Hank Rourke stared at the form Helen had slid across the desk. His name was already written at the top in her neat handwriting. Temporary guardian, Hank Rourke. It looked official, heavy, like a door he wasn't sure he was ready to open. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the yellowed ceiling tiles. "You really think I'm the right person for this?" he asked quietly. Helen didn't answer right away. She watched him the way older sisters do, like she already knew the answer he was trying to avoid. "I think the right person is the one who didn't turn him away. The one who stayed up all night making sure he was warm. The one who saw a scared kid and didn't walk past him." She paused. "That's you, Hank." But Hank's mind was already somewhere else, in the past. Back to that hospital room 10 years ago. The machines, the stillness, the way the world stopped when his son, Cal, took his last breath. After that, something in Hank had shut off. He did his job. He kept his distance. He never let anyone close enough to break him again. Until Noah. "That boy doesn't need another broken man pretending he's whole," Hank muttered, running a hand down his face. "He needs someone steady, someone who knows what they're doing." Helen leaned forward. "He needs someone who cares. That's what makes you steady." Later that evening, while Hank sat alone at his desk, Noah approached quietly, Bo trotting beside him. The boy held a drawing in his hand, a rough pencil sketch of Bo sitting beside Hank. "I made this," Noah said softly, placing it on the desk. "It's for you, in case we don't stay." Hank picked up the paper and studied it. The lines were shaky, but the image was clear. The boy saw him, not just the badge, not just the uniform, him, the man who had shown up. Hank swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Thanks, kid. This means a lot." As Noah turned to walk back to the guest room, Hank looked again at the drawing, then down at the form still sitting beneath his coffee cup. His hand hovered over it for a long moment before he reached for the pen. Some choices don't come easy, but some don't give you a choice at all. The snow had started again by mid-morning, light at first, then heavier, covering the streets of Coldridge in a familiar, suffocating white. Inside the station, Noah was sitting cross-legged on the floor with Bo, showing him how to stay and roll over. Hank Rourke, paperwork stacked in front of him, signed the last line on the guardianship form. His signature looked uncertain, like it still couldn't believe what it had just agreed to. He hadn't even capped the pen when the front door burst open. A gust of wind slammed through the lobby, followed by a voice Hank hadn't expected to hear so soon. "Where is he?" Walt Dempsey stood there, eyes bloodshot, hair unkempt, coat barely zipped. There was a storm behind those eyes. Not just anger, but pride wounded in a way that made it dangerous. Hank stood slowly. "Walt, you need to calm down. This isn't the place. He's my son," Walt shouted, pointing toward the back room. "You don't get to keep him just 'cause you feel bad about your own past." The words hit harder than they should have, because they were true in part. Hank's face stiffened. He moved around the desk, positioning himself between Walt and the hallway. "He's not property, Walt. He's a child. And he came to me scared out of his mind. Said you told him to leave." "I didn't mean it," Walt said, his voice cracking for the first time. "I was drunk. I was mad. Doesn't mean I don't want him." "No," Hank said firmly. "What you meant or didn't mean doesn't change the fact that he was freezing outside your trailer at night with no one looking for him. That's neglect. And he deserves better." Walt's shoulders dropped. His rage deflated into shame. He looked at the floor. "You don't understand. After his mom died, I didn't know how to be a father. I still don't." Hank's jaw clenched. He saw himself in those words. 10 years ago, staring into the void left behind by Cal, unsure how to keep living, let alone parenting. But the difference was clear. Hank had walked through it. Walt had shut the door behind him. "I do understand," Hank replied, voice low. "More than you think. But the boy isn't a second chance for you to get it right when it's convenient. He needs someone who shows up, every single day." Walt didn't respond. He just nodded once, barely, then turned and walked back into the snow, leaving Hank with a storm of his own. The snow had softened by late afternoon, drifting gently across the windshield of Hank Rourke's cruiser as he pulled into the driveway of his small farmhouse on the edge of town. Noah sat in the passenger seat, silent, with Bo curled up between his feet. Neither of them spoke much during the ride, but there was no tension, just the quiet that comes when something broken begins to mend. Hank opened the front door and stepped aside. "Come on in," he said. Noah hesitated for a split second before walking through the doorway. The house smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. It was small, simple, worn in all the right places, but it felt safe. The kind of safe that doesn't need words to prove itself. There was a photo on the fireplace mantel. A young boy with blonde hair, holding a golden retriever. Hank noticed Noah staring at it. "That was Cal," Hank said softly. "My son. He passed away a long time ago." Noah didn't ask how. He just nodded, then looked down at Bo. "He looks like he was happy." "He was," Hank replied, "and I think he'd be glad you're here." Later that evening, Hank made grilled cheese sandwiches while Noah set the table without being asked. Bo stayed nearby, his tail thumping occasionally against the kitchen floor. The rhythm of it all was imperfect but natural, like people figuring out how to belong again. After dinner, they watched a movie in the living room. Noah didn't say much, but he leaned just slightly into Hank's shoulder by the halfway point. Hank didn't move. He just let the moment be what it was. Before bed, Hank brought out a spare set of pajamas and showed Noah the guest room. The bed was made, the sheets still crisp from when Helen had come through a few months back. As Noah climbed in, Bo jumped up and curled beside him like he had every night since the station. Hank stood in the doorway, unsure what to say. "You don't have to tuck me in or anything?" Noah mumbled, clearly embarrassed. Hank chuckled. "Good. Wasn't planning on it." But before he closed the door, Noah's voice called out again. Quiet, hesitant. "Thank you for letting me stay." Hank paused, his hand on the doorframe. "You're not just staying, Noah," he said. "You live here now. This is your home." The door clicked shut gently, and for the first time in a long while, they both slept soundly. Spring came late to Coldridge, but when it did, it brought with it the kind of mornings that felt like second chances. The snow had melted, the trees were beginning to bloom, and the air carried the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. Noah Dempsey had been living with Hank Rourke for almost 3 months now, and though they didn't talk much about the past, it lived between them. Not as a wound, but as a reminder of where they'd started. Hank had kept the routine steady. Breakfast by 7, school drop-off, work at the station, and dinners at home. But it wasn't the structure that changed Noah, it was the consistency. The quiet presence of someone who showed up every day. Someone who never asked for more than he was ready to give. And somehow that made Noah want to give more. One Saturday morning, Hank stood at the edge of the backyard, coffee in hand, watching as Noah threw a tennis ball across the grass. Bo chased after it with wild joy, his ears flopping, tongue hanging out. The boy's laughter filled the air, real, loud, and unguarded. Hank hadn't heard it like that before. Not once. Stopped him cold. Not because it surprised him, but because it sounded like healing. Later that day, Helen called to check in. Papers had been finalized. The temporary guardianship was now official. Hank was Noah's legal guardian. There was no big ceremony, no courtroom moment, just a quiet signature in a small town that changed both of their lives forever. After the call, Hank told Noah, handing him a simple envelope with the papers inside. The boy held it for a long time before finally asking, "So this means I don't have to leave?" "No," Hank said. "It means you never did." That night, Noah placed the envelope inside the drawer of the nightstand beside his bed. Next to it was the sketch he had once given Hank, the one of Bo and the deputy sitting side by side. Only now it had something new. Another figure, drawn carefully in pencil, standing just behind them, Noah himself. Family. As the sun set and the house settled into quiet, Hank stood in the hallway, listening to the sound of Noah's steady breathing from the other side of the door. He thought about everything they'd lost, everything they'd found, and what, despite everything, had managed to stay. Some people come into your life by accident, but the ones who stay, they're the ones you were meant to find.